Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 617, and today's date is March 16th, 2015, and the title of this episode is Kiev is skirting around the Minsk II deal to buy time to push war. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, we understand throughout Europe, many of the countries right now are in deep debt. I mean, there is no way out of this. They're going to continually need more and more debt because they just don't have the revenue to bring in to cover the debt that they have. It just cannot be sustained. And we can see right now, every time they bring in more debt, there's more austerity where people lose their jobs. They have to cut programs. And we can see this does not help any of the countries whatsoever. Actually, it makes it worse, and it makes it so the central banking system can come in and buy up a lot of the natural resources inside the country. And we see Tsipras is out there, and he's saying, listen, all of this that we've seen throughout Europe right now, it's just not working. Austerity, not just in Greece, but in Europe as a whole, it does not work. And Greece was the first nation that needed this incredible bailout, and they told us back in 2008, 2009 that Greece is absolutely fine now. They're on their road to recovery, and here we are in 2015, and they're not on any road to recovery. Actually, it has gotten so bad, they had to elect a government in there that would stop the Eurozone from giving them more money and putting them further and further into debt and pushing austerity on the people because they made it so ridiculously bad inside of Greece. The entire system is completely falling apart. And here we are today. Now, Greece is still battling with the ECB. They're trying to make a deal where they're not going to pay off their debt, where they're not going to impose austerity. And of course, Germany, the ECB, they want their money, period. So what happened? Greece threw out and came out swinging with, back during World War II, Germany owes us money for war reparations. And of course, Germany's out there saying, absolutely not. We owe you absolutely nothing. We paid it. And we can see that Greece right now, they have proof that they actually owe this money. The Greek defense minister issued a statement confirming that archives that they possess from Nazi armed forces support the country's claims for reparations. And of course, once we see these documents and once we see what's going on here, Germany's going to have a response to this. And of course, they're going to say, well, we don't owe you the money. And of course, Greece is going to say, well, we don't owe you the money for the debt. And we're going to have to see what happens because we understand that Tsipras is going to meet with Putin. And we can see right now Putin is ready to extend his hand to get rid of the food ban, to help the banks out, to help the people out if they exit the Eurozone. And again, the emergency lending comes up in June. He's meeting with Putin in May. And we're going to have to watch this very, very carefully to see exactly what's going to happen at this point in time. Now, here in the United States government central bankers are telling us that we are still in this incredible recovery, that everything is fine. There are absolutely no problems. People are finding jobs everywhere. This is why the unemployment is down by to 5.5%. But from everything that we see and all of these economic indicators that are coming in, it shows us a completely different story. It shows us that we are not in a recovery. We're actually heading towards a depression. I mean, look at the manufacturing. The Empire stats came in today, and they missed expectations of 8.00. They came in at 6.9. New orders tumble back into the red, and they're at 16-month lows. We see U.S. manufacturing output falls for the third month in a row. And we see they had a revision back in January from to make the numbers look a lot better. It was at negative 0.3%. They brought it up to a 0.2%. And February's factory output fell by 0.2%. Missed expectations once again. And we can see right now, this is all occurring because people do not have those high paying jobs. A lot of people don't even have jobs. We have 93 million or so people out of the workforce, not because they don't want to bring income into their homes to support their family, to pay for their house, their apartment, to pay for their car, to go on trips. They can't find work because there are no jobs, no high-paying jobs, or jobs in general. Because as we can see, the retail market is drying up, jobs are disappearing. We see that companies like Dell, IBM, Viacom, Sony, Intel, they're all laying off people. There's many more than that. So if we have all of this in the corporate area where they're all laying off these jobs, where is everyone going to find a job? It's getting harder and harder to do. And this is pretty evident when we look at the Baltic Dry Index. It's holding steady around 564 points or so. It bounces up 2, comes down 3, but this is where we are right now. Now the question is, if we have the unemployment figure down at 5.5%, you would think that at this point, compared to what? 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, when the unemployment numbers were much higher, we should see an expansion of retail, of home purchasing, of more companies hiring. But we don't. Actually, we should see more raw material being shipped around the world so the factories can produce because people have the jobs and people are going out and purchasing goods. Think about this. During the holiday season of 2014, unemployment was what? 5.6, 5.7%? Compared to 2013, 2012, 2011. We should have had an incredible holiday season. But it was the opposite. Why are all the sales declining? Why are stores closing as more and more people get jobs? It makes no sense. The only thing that does make sense is that these numbers are fake, phony, and false. Look at the Baltic Dry Index 1 year ago, March 2014, on this day. It was at 1518. Today it is at 564. Actually, if you look back, it's at 900 the year previous to that. It's at 1800 previous to that, and I think the year before that is around 3300. And now we're at 564. What's happening here is these manipulating numbers, unemployment, inflation, GDP, stock market, precious metals, they're completely separating themselves from what's really going on. They don't even make sense anymore. We see the corporate media out there trying to explain what's going on here, and they're just making up stuff. We see the high-frequency traders, the plunger protection team, every time the market takes a huge big dip, they try to push it right back up with this almost the same amount that the dip came down. They're doing everything they possibly can to keep this illusion alive. But eventually what's going to happen, what's really going on in America, throughout Europe and Canada, Australia, will continually separate itself from their illusion, and people are going to scratch their heads. Even the corporate media is going to go, okay, now things are really not making sense. How do we explain this away? And we're getting to that point. I mean, we look at the real estate market, the home builders' sentiment. It's continually plummeting. Of course, they're blaming it on the weather, but when you look at this, it's not plummeting in the Northeast as much as it's plummeting out west, where they're really not having bad weather. And we can see right now that buyer traffic, sales, they're declining. Houses are staying on the market longer and longer. Companies have been laying off people in their mortgage departments since August of 2013. Not like 100 here. We're talking thousands, because they knew the American people are tapped out. There's no reason to have these people in the departments because they know people will not be taking loans out. Of course, they're continually trying with all these different programs to drag people in to keep the system going, but it isn't working. We see the United States, the government is hitting its debt ceiling once again. How many times have they hit the debt ceiling since 1971 to present day? I mean, it only came in effect a couple years ago, but the debt continually goes up. The debt ceiling is immaterial at this point. What they should be discussing, and what Congress and the American people should be discussing, why do we have the Federal Reserve that continually puts us into debt? Because all of this debt is continually growing with this interest. It's getting larger and larger. Why are we borrowing money from a private corporation instead of the government creating it by itself, loaning it out with no interest? It makes no sense whatsoever. But we know why they're doing this. They want all eyes off of the central banking system. This is why they do these things. They don't want the other issues coming up. They want you to think, oh, here comes the debt ceiling, and we're going to have to start shutting things down. The American people should be worried. And of course, you know what they shut down. They put up the barriers in front of all the monuments. They close down the parks to make people think that, see, look, this is what's going to happen. But what they keep going and what they continually operate with everything else is their private restaurants, their gym, their private golf course. They keep them traveling in private planes, limos. That's all fine. They keep the aid going to all the other countries, billions upon billions of dollars. They keep the industrial war complex going with billions and billions of dollars, and they try to convince you that if we shut down these monuments and we cut this and we make sure we make sure that people can't go into the public parks all around the country, people will look at this and say, oh my God, we need to pass this. The debt ceiling must be raised. But as we continually do this, it just makes the situation worse and worse. And the debt ceiling at this point is actually meaningless. There's no reason for it because they're just going to raise it anyhow. It makes no difference. The real issue is not the debt ceiling. The real issue is the central bank, the Fed, and why are we borrowing the money? Now, we see in the mainstream media, we see all the mainstream economists out there telling us that we are in this recovery, it's ongoing, and the future looks great. We see growth in the future, we see everything improving, but we see other economists coming out that aren't controlled by the government, that aren't giving us propaganda, that are looking at the situation and saying, something just doesn't seem right. We see that a new paper in the Journal of International Productivity Monitor finds that the U.S. recession is in a long-term decline in productivity growth. The author is U.S. economist Professor Robert J. Gordon of Northeastern University, and he concludes, we face a significant possibility that the disposable income growth for the bottom 99% of the income distribution could be as low as 0.5% per year, or perhaps even lower than that, 0.2%. Future growth in real GDP per capita is going to slow, actually most likely come to a screeching halt. And we're starting to see this right now. It has been creeping up on us, and now we see it. People do not have the disposable income. People are not going out and spending their money because they do not have the high-paying jobs. And this situation is just going to get worse as time goes on. It will not improve because the system is collapsing. The central bankers know that this is the end game, and they are trying to get as much wealth as they possibly can before this system goes down, and they're trying to start a war to blame this on another country or group before this entire system collapses. This is what they're doing right now, and they could care less about the people in the United States, in Europe, in Canada, in Australia, because we have to remember the central bank has no allegiance whatsoever to any country, to any people except themselves. Now, out in Ukraine, in Crimea actually, we see that Crimean authorities have signed the first two major contracts with investors since it has joined Russia. And the contract deal is an energy deal, and it's valued around $30 million. It was made with Russia, and they say they have many more contracts in the works with other countries. And we can see right now that they are doing this to build up the region. They have a duty-free economic zone in Crimea, which came into effect on March 2014 and has made the region particularly attractive to investors because of the tax breaks. So we can see there's a lot of countries, a lot of corporations that will be investing in this area. And we understand that people in Crimea, people in the southeastern regions of Ukraine and in Russia, there are a lot of sanctions being imposed on certain people, certain companies. But what we're seeing is they know how to get around these sanctions, just like Iran has done, just like Cuba has done, Venezuela, all these countries, North Korea, they're always getting around sanctions. And from Obama, as we know, sanctions don't work. Because it's proven that Cuba, for 50-something years, the sanctions didn't work whatsoever. But they continually put sanctions on all these countries even though they don't work. But all these countries know how to get around them. And we can see that every time they impose something onto Russia, Russia turns around and does something twice as horrific with regards to sanctions than what was placed on them. I mean, the food ban, the agricultural food ban that they placed on the European countries is really hurting those countries. We're seeing it's costing them about 40 billion euros each year. And they're just having food pile up. They don't know what to do with it. And we're seeing the losses just from farmers because of the food embargo is hitting anywhere from 12 billion euros in 2014. And this is not helping the economies in this region. And as we go forward, if the European Union, the United States decides, hey, let's place more sanctions on Russia, Russia just might turn around and do something else. Because what Russia is doing at this point, it is turning around and saying, okay, we can get our food from this country, we can have production in that country. And they're turning towards the BRIC nations and substituting what they were getting from Europe from the other nations and trading without the dollar or the euro. And we see there's a lot of Gulf region countries that are starting to turn towards the yuan. We see United Arab Emirates is saying, you know something? This might be a great time to start getting into the yuan. And the yuan has gradually become a new choice for some countries in reserve diversification. Now, every single country is protecting itself because it understands that the US dollar is in its end game. And this is why we see all these trade deals all across the world where they're saying, you know something, we're going to keep the yuan renminbi in reserves to protect ourselves. And we have to remember the yuan renminbi, it's slated to become a reserve currency, and it's going to be looked at, and they're in talks right now with the IMF. And the United Arab Emirates is the biggest export market for Chinese goods in the region, and they're thinking to themselves, why are we dealing in the dollar when we can bypass this and guess what? Use the yuan instead. And this is what they're doing at this point. Now, we understand the United States government, the central bankers, they use drones all over in Yemen, in Libya, in Pakistan, any place where they need to maintain control and keep that puppet government in place. Now, a lot of the countries we see this is not working, but again, they've used drones and they killed a lot of innocent people. Actually, some Americans they've killed. And the American Civil Liberties Union is now suing the Obama administration in federal court on Monday in an attempt to compel the release of classified information regarding how did the White House actually target the certain people using drones. Because right now it's a secret. They don't want to tell anyone how they do this. The lawsuit seeks disclosure of the criteria for placing individuals on the administration kill list. Obama acknowledges that the White House has remotely singled out and eliminated suspect terrorists, but his administration has guarded closely any information about how it actually works. And the ACLU is out there saying, you know what, the public should know who the government is killing, and I completely agree. How are they figuring this out of who to target? And what do they do when they hit a civilian population instead of the target? And none of this has been out in the open. And the question is, when they pick it, the target, why actually are they killing them? There's no good reason why legal memos relating to the targeted killing program should be secret in their entirety, nor is there any legitimate justification for the government's refusal to acknowledge individual strikes or to disclose civilian casualties or to disclose the procedures under which the individuals are added to the government kill list. It sounds like the secret no-fly list here in the country, because what they're actually doing in these countries, they're not going after terrorists. Every time the United States government central bankers take over a country and they put in a puppet regime, those people who are against the puppet regime, who are fighting against it, they become the terrorists. And they include them on the terrorist list, and this is why they're called Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is used for many different terms. Those people in the Middle East who no longer agree with the government, who want their country back, they're called Al-Qaeda. They used Al-Qaeda in Syria to overthrow the president of Syria, Assad. And then, of course, now it's metastasizing into the Islamic State. And we see in Ukraine the same thing is happening. They just couldn't call them Al-Qaeda because it wouldn't make any sense. But as soon as the puppet government was in place, all those people who opposed the government were then called terrorists. And we can see right now, if they revealed this, it would show they weren't really going after individuals and terrorists. They were going after everyday people who did not want the puppet government. And we see this happening inside each one of these countries, in Yemen, in Libya, in Yemen, in Iraq. The people are fighting back. They don't want the U.S. there. They don't want the puppet government. They want to take control of their own lives. But of course, when the United States is out there trying to overthrow a government, they say the people have the right. It's democracy. It's freedom. And once they have the puppet government, the people don't have the right. They're terrorists. So they place both sides of the coin here, and they use whatever they need at the specific time. But again, I do agree, there's absolutely no reason why this has to stay a secret. Now, a couple days ago, I talked about how the United States government central bankers are pushing regime change in a lot of different countries: Venezuela, Argentina, Brazil, China, Russia, North Korea. They've done it throughout the Middle East. And we see in Brazil, the people are out there protesting. And I laid out 5 steps of a color revolution. And this seems that it's in the 5th stage of a color revolution, which is staging an institutional coup on the basis of street protests, calling for the president's resignation. And this is what we saw over the weekend. Brazil, and as we know, the economies in Brazil, Venezuela, they are hurting because of the suppression of oil. And we can see this is part of their agenda to bring down a lot of these countries, make their economies collapse, because this is what they try to do, to have regime change, to say, hey, we can't have this government. They call in corruption, and they keep throwing all of this out there. And we can see the people are out there, and they are protesting. They're saying that, yes, we want the president, Dilma. They want her out. They want her impeached. They want her to resign. And we can see this happening in Brazil. We also see this happening, and it's occurring in Venezuela right now. Maduro, again, is asking for special powers to confront the U.S., and it looks like he's getting these special powers. And again, I don't mind if a country by itself wants to have a revolution and overthrow the government because it's because it's for the betterment of the people. Just like here in the United States, as it's building and the movement is building and people are getting the word out, I don't have a problem. Because when the governments do go bad, it is time to remove them of their duties and replace them with a government that's going to work for the people. What I have a problem with is when a government is out there trying to manipulate another government to have regime change for their interests and corporate interest and a central banking interest. And this is what we are seeing in many of these countries. throughout the Middle East, in South America, in China, and Russia. And of course, Jen Psaki was answering questions, and one of the questions was, does the State Department, the White House, condone regime change? And Jen Psaki was out there saying, no, well, as a matter of long-standing policy, the United States does not support political transitions by non-constitutional means, and basically the United States does not and has not pushed regime change in any country. And of course a reporter asked, well, wait a minute, you're trying to tell me that the United States was not involved in any regime change whatsoever? And it seems that Jen Psaki smirked, and she kind of avoided the question with a joke so she wouldn't have to actually answer the question, because she knows, they all know, that the United States has been behind many regime changes around the world, and I'm talking in the double digits. And I posted this video on X22Report.com, saying you can watch her facial expressions and see how she reacts to the question and how she avoids the question. And we can see regime change happening now and occurring in many different countries at this point. Now, we talk about Afghanistan quite a bit. And we always knew, going all the way back when the president told us they're going to be removing all the military personnel from Afghanistan, we have always said this is not going to happen. As soon as the bilateral security agreement was signed by the new president, where John Kerry helped get this new president elected, and because they knew he was going to sign it, we knew the troops were going to stay in the country, because this removes liability for whatever happens inside the country, and there's no liability on the troops. And once they got that, what do we see? A reversal. And we see this is continuing. And again, we have to remember, the Afghanistan, it is in a strategic location. They're growing poppies, and they sell it across to different countries to pay for their covert operations. They sell it as opium and other drugs. We also see there's huge amount of natural resources. An oil pipeline is strategic near Russia, and they're not giving this up, because Russia and China are in Afghanistan right now. They have huge copper deposits, huge lithium deposits, and we see right now the Obama administration is abandoning the plan to cut the number of U.S. forces in Afghanistan, and he's not going to do it. Actually, they'll be adding more troops going into 2016 and further than that, because as we know, once they push this war to get started, they're going to use this area. Everything's already set up. The bases are already there. And they haven't really made any final decision on the numbers and how many troops will be staying in Afghanistan. And we knew this was going to happen, because all the indicators pointed to that. And this is exactly what we see. And they're just going to ramp it right back up. This is what is coming, because they realize, as they move military assets all across Eastern Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and the Pacific, they understand they can't give up this location. They need to keep it, and they need to ramp up the number of soldiers in this area. Now, out in Ukraine, we see Poreshenko. He is out there, and of course, as we know, the IMF has loaned them $17.5 million, and he's completely being honest with his people for once. This money is not for you. This will not help you. We're not going to use this for any programs to help anybody. You're just going to have to suffer through it, because we're taking this money, we're putting some in our pockets, and we're going to go buy military assets, because we have a war to fight. And this is basically what he is telling the people. And get ready for another war. Now, as we know, over the weekend, Ukraine needed to supply the Donetsk area with special status. They were supposed to draw it up in paperwork, according to the Minsk agreement. This was due on March 14th, and guess what they did? Well, they didn't do it. He has a draft right now, and Poreshenko has presented a bill on changes to the law on a local self-governance in some districts of the Donetsk and Lugansk regions. The parliament system said, registering the draft statement on Monday. According to the document, the special status in Donbass will be implemented now only after elections. Now, the Minsk agreement reads, by March 14th, the Ukrainian government should adopt an order fixing list of districts in Donbass which will have special political and economic statuses. However, the order has not been adopted yet. Heads of the DPR and LPR have asked German Chancellor and French President, as guarantors of the Minsk Agreement, to press Ukraine authorities to implement the agreements, but they haven't. It's just a draft. And what's interesting is that Kiev is maintaining the blockade on Donbass. Actually, they're stepping it up, restricting travel of residents, and they're closing it down so they can't get supplies inside the area. Now, what are they planning? Well, they're planning for a major offensive. Poreshenko right now has introduced a bill to Parliament to let foreign armed forces into Ukraine to take part of joint exercises with Ukraine forces. Well, we've seen this before. They're going to have drills. They're going to be bringing in military assets. They're going to be bringing in forces. And guess what happens? They don't leave because they're being brought in on purpose for a special offensive that's going to occur. And most of these forces will probably be fired upon. And once they fire it upon, guess what? They're in the battle. So we can see, according to the draft law, Ukraine plans 3 Ukrainian American command post exercises: Fearless Guardian 2015, Sea Breeze 2015, and Saber Guardian Rapid Trident 2015, and 2 Ukrainian Polish exercises, Secure Skies 2015 and Law and Order 2015 for this year. The Fearless Guardian will take place in Ukraine in the period from March to November and will bring about 2,200 troops in. Ukraine is providing up to 200 armed forces troops and up to 1,000 National Guard personnel, and the U.S. will be represented by a maximum of about 1,000 servicemen. Sea Breeze will be a 25-day exercise held between June and October in the Black Sea, and that's going to be about 2,500 troops in that scenario. So we can see they're just building up, getting ready for these drills, and I wouldn't be surprised if something happens and it goes live. And while all this is happening, and Poreshenko is not keeping his word and sticking to the Minsk agreement, Yatsenyuk calls on the Ministry of Defense and the General Staff to put troops on full combat alert. He's also called for equipping air raid shelters. Now, if they're putting forth peace and a ceasefire agreement, and they're trying to follow it, why are they doing all of this at this time? Because they don't want peace. They know there's going to be a false flag event that's going to occur that's going to lead them into war. And we can see that they're continually doing this. And we can see McCain is out there saying that there will be no let-up on the economic blockade of Crimea until it becomes part of Ukraine again. Actually, Washington refuses to recognize the referendum that Crimea is part of Russia. Actually, they consider it still part of Ukraine. And again, like I said, they're going to go after the southeastern region and eventually move into Crimea to take Crimea. And this is going to set off World War III if they continually push in this direction. And we can see this is exactly what they're trying to do. Now, to continue with everything that we're talking about with Ukraine not abiding by the Minsk agreement, we see Poreshenko out there saying, you know what? The Minsk agreement on the settlement in eastern Ukraine, it's just not working. Adding that the Minsk II was a hope but not reality for Kiev. So he admits it's not going to work. He's not going to abide by it. And we're going to do whatever we have to do to push the war forward and to capture the southeastern region and then go after Crimea. Now, as we know, the United States and the Czech Republic flew over Russia using the Open Sky Treaty to show that there's no armed forces being built up. And guess what? There are no armed forces being built up. The OSCE has said, no, There's nothing coming over the border whatsoever. Even Germany's Angela Merkel said, no, there is nothing going on. This is all propaganda, which NATO is continually pushing, which the United States is continually pushing, because they want war. We see that Russia, using the Open Sky Treaty, is going to fly over Germany, over the Netherlands, over Belgium, over Luxembourg, between March 16th and the 21st, under the Treaty on Open Skies. And we can see every single country is doing this to look at the build-up, to see if there is a build-up, and to see if everything is status quo. And guess what? Right now, we see Eastern Europe, they're building up military assets. We see in Russia, they're not building up troops whatsoever on the border. Yes, inwards, inside the country, they do have troops because it's their country, just like all the other countries will have troops. Now, in South Korea, and we mentioned this a while back, but it looks like they're getting delivery right now, the U.S. is planning to set up the Terminal High Altitude Air Defense System, THAAD, in case of an emergency on the Korean Peninsula. Right now, as we know, there's about 28,500 troops on the ground in South Korea as a means of military support for Seoul. The United States insists that the battery is purely defensive in nature and they're not going to use it in any other way. Well, once this war goes live, we can see they're putting all the military assets in place to defend and to attack when the time comes. And they will be using all of this during the next war. And we can see this is a continual build-up towards that. Because again, as we know, the economic collapse is coming. The statistical numbers which they manipulate, they are moving further and further away from the reality of the economy, which is in complete collapse at this time. Now, we understand the United States and many of the other nations, they're talking about peace. In Iran, they're talking about the peace deal, the P5+1. But of course, Israel continually gets in the way. Netanyahu continually gets in the way. They have fake reports coming out to show that, yes, they're building nuclear weapons, and all of it has turned out to be propaganda. They've been telling us this for the last 30 years, and they're 3 to 5 months away from building a nuclear weapon. And guess what? It has never happened. I mean, Iran has signed the non-proliferation treaty. They have the inspectors come in, and nothing has ever found. We found out the CIA has planted false evidence that Iran is building nuclear weapons. So we know this is all propaganda, and we can see actually Netanyahu is probably on his way out because his party doesn't have the votes at this point, because the Israelis see through him and saying, you know something? Everything that he's been telling us is a lie. And we can see right now that the United States has taken Iran off the worldwide threat assessment. They are removed. The same with Hezbollah. Now, all of a sudden, one day they're terrorists, one day they're a threat, and the next day they are not. And we can see it was complete propaganda. But the question is, what is the P5+1 really about? Because once we see this all worked out, if it is, the natural resources inside Iran will most likely be sold using the dollar. We will see a central bank which will be controlled by the private Western banking system. We will then see Iran put into debt, because the only way to keep this system going is to continually push out debt and make sure countries keep the dollar in reserve. And this is what we need to look at if this peace deal goes forward, because then we know this is what it was really all about, and that's exactly what it's really all about. Now, in Libya, we understand the people have taken over that country. They set up a parliament in Benghazi. We know the puppet government is trying to run the country, but they have no foot in Libya right now. The people have taken control. They're selling the oil, not using the dollar. And of course, we can see the U.S., the coalition forces, they're getting ready to go into Libya. And just recently, an Italian energy company has discovered a huge amount of natural gas off the coast of Libya. And guess what? The central bankers want this. They want this put on the dollar. And we can see right now, they're not just going to sit back and watch this happen. And we can see that everything is being built up right now. Now there's reports coming out that the Islamic State has kidnapped a number of foreign medical employees in Libya. And they're just building this up to get the war started. And we can see that the authorization for war is still pending in the Congress. And what's very interesting is that the Syrian opposition, the opposition forces, which is controlled by the United States government central bankers, they're out there saying, maybe Assad can stay in power. And we have Kerry out there also saying that, maybe we need to have some talks. Maybe we need to forget about the military solution. Maybe we need a political solution. Now, he said this before. This was back in the Geneva II talks where they came together with Assad and the opposition forces. And the only thing the United States had on the agenda was Assad stepping down. Because we have to remember the president, John Kerry, and all the other government officials have told us that Assad is a terrorist. He's a dictator. He cannot lead this country. He shouldn't be there. He needs to be removed. And now all of a sudden they're saying we can work with Assad? Are they trying to tell us right now that, wait, he is legitimate? He is the president of Syria? But then again, later on, the U.S. State Department spokesman Marie Harf said that in John Kerry's statement that, no, this was all wrong. He didn't mean what he said. Basically, what he's trying to say is that Assad is not really the president. We can't really negotiate with him. And this is something that we're not really looking at this point. So we have two things going on now in the government, and they can't even keep the story straight. And of course, Assad is sitting back saying, yes, this is all lip service. They're trying to tell us that, yes, they want a political solution. And of course, as we know, he's heard this before, and he's waiting for the action, and that's what I'm waiting for. I always go by the actions, not what they say. What they say is meaningless. Let's see what the United States government central bankers actually do. And Assad is sitting back going, you know what? Let's see what they do, because they told us they wanted a political solution. We went to the Geneva II talks, and guess what? Their solution was for me to step down. Let's see what else they have. Now, what I'm thinking is that the Islamic State, which we know is the proxy army for the United States, for Israel, for UK, and other nations, and during this time where the United States has been bombing the entire area, the proxy army has expanded their territory by 3 times. And I'm thinking they're trying to use the political aspect right now to say, listen, you keep your section of Syria and we'll keep our section. And this way they don't have to worry about the fight in this section, because they will govern it. They will own it. And then they can go ahead and maneuver and attack the rest of Syria. And I think this is their play. I think this is what they're trying to do. And again, we know what's happening. The Islamic State is put there on purpose to gain ground, so the United States government, the central bankers, can then push forth and take over Syria. Because we have to remember, they want the natural resources. They want to put a pipeline in there, supply Europe with gas. And they need to prop up the US dollar. And this is exactly what they're doing at this time. Now, during all this, we see the EU is out there, and they're preparing to lay down additional restrictive measures against Syria. And it's amazing. They want political talk, they want this, but they always end up pushing more sanctions on a country, which makes no sense for peace whatsoever. Now, over the weekend, and we discussed this, we understand the authorization of war is pending, and we know they want that passed. Congress is not really behind it at this point. So we need some type of an event. And we see warnings coming out of Saudi Arabia. And we see the embassy is on heightened security, and they're shutting it down for Sunday and Monday, maybe going past that time period. And we have to watch this very carefully, because we understand they need to convince the government, the people in Congress, that they need to pass the authorization for war. Now, will Saudi Arabia be the country where we see the event occur? It might well be, because we see their putting out warnings, but it could occur in any of the countries. It could happen in France again, in Belgium, in England, in Australia, here in the United States. Anywhere they can do this to show Congress that you need to pass this. And it seems that it needs a push. And every time a bill needs a push, they always have an event ready to go to push it through. And we're going to have to watch this very closely as we move forward. Listen, everyone. Thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.